All right, let's get right into it. We are decoding the incredibly high stakes talks happening between the US and Iran in Geneva. You've got warships on the move, you've got diplomats at the table, and believe me, the entire world is watching. We're going to break down what's really happening behind the headlines. So, what's the real story here? I mean, are we looking at the final countdown to an actual conflict? Or is all this military posturing just a really loud cover for a different kind of game altogether? That's the big question we're going to answer today. Okay, here's our game plan. We'll start in Geneva with the negotiations themselves, then we'll look at the two really tough positions each side is taking. After that, we'll explain those military moves, decode the real odds of what might happen, and wrap it all up with the final strategic takeaway. First up, the negotiations in Geneva. Let's peel back the curtain and see who is actually in the room and how these talks are even structured. You might think this is just the US and Iran in a room, but it is way more complicated than that. At its core, yes, it's a bilateral track with Switzerland playing the crucial role of facilitator. But then you have all these other players. The E3, that's the UK, France, and Germany, are heavily involved just indirectly. The Gulf states, they're definitely aligned in the background, watching every move. And you can bet Russia and China are on the sidelines, sending their own political signals. It's a very crowded room, even if most of them don't have a seat at the main table. Okay, on to section 2. Let's talk about the two hard lines. This right here is the absolute core of why getting a deal is so incredibly difficult. And you can see the massive gap right here. On one side, the US is demanding nuclear transparency and strict limits on uranium enrichment. They also want Iran to scale back its proxy forces across the region. And in return, they're offering a slow, phased relief from sanctions. But Iran's position is completely different. They're saying, no way. Sanctions relief has to come first. And they are absolutely firm that their missile program and their national sovereignty are completely off the table, non-negotiable. So what's the bottom line here? Well, it means both sides are pretty much locked into these very public, very tough positions. Politically, neither side has a lot of wiggle room to back down, and that makes finding any kind of middle ground a monumental challenge. And, while all this talking is happening in Geneva, there's another story unfolding, and that's the military one. Let's take a look at how these actions are seriously raising the stakes. Just in the last 24 hours, we've seen U.S. airlift activity really ramp up. We're talking about heavy cargo planes, C-17s and C-5s on the move across Europe and the Atlantic. They're being supported by KC-135 tankers for refueling. And at the same time, maritime surveillance over the Gulf is at a much higher tempo than usual. These are not subtle moves. These are very clear signals designed to be seen. So that's the U.S. side. But what's Iran doing? Well, their response is different. Yes, their official rhetoric, the language they're using, has gotten much sharper. But on the ground, we are not seeing any major visible mobilization of their forces or dispersal of missiles. It really seems like their focus is on projecting this image of resilience and national strength right before the talks, rather than actually preparing for a fight. Okay, so you see all these military moves, you hear the tough talk, and you're probably thinking, is this it? Is war about to break out? Or is this all just about leverage? This is where the strategy gets really fascinating. This one quote from the analysis really changes everything. It says, a visible deployment can reinforce diplomacy by raising perceived costs. Think about that. In other words, these military moves aren't really about starting a war. They're about winning the negotiation by making the alternative, an actual hot conflict, seem way, way more costly and painful. And there's a name for this. It's a classic case of what's called strategic posturing. It's when you move your military assets around, not as a prelude to an attack, but as a really powerful diplomatic tool. It's a way to strengthen your hand at the negotiating table and to deter your opponent. The planes and the ships, they're part of the dialogue. So, if it's all posturing, what are the real chances of this whole thing blowing up? Of the talks failing and leading to actual military conflict? Well, check this out. The data analysis puts it at just 10%. Right. So if a total breakdown is only a 10% chance, what's actually likely to happen? Well, take a look. The most probable outcome, with a 40% chance, is just a symbolic statement about de-escalation. After that, a limited technical agreement is at 30%, followed by the talks just getting extended without a major breakthrough. All the signs are pointing towards diplomacy continuing one way or another. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say a strike does happen in the next week or two. Who's most likely to pull the trigger? Well, the analysis suggests the highest risk, somewhere between 20 and 25%, actually comes from a unilateral strike by Israel. Iran starting something is a bit lower, and a direct U.S. strike is seen as the least likely of the three scenarios. All right, let's bring this all home. After looking at the diplomacy, the hard lines, the military moves, and the odds, what's the one big idea you should walk away with from all of this? The most crucial point to remember is this. What we are watching is not a countdown to war. It's a game of incredibly high-stakes diplomatic chess. And in this game, the military forces aren't just waiting for orders to attack. They're actually pieces on the board, being used to gain leverage and shape the final outcome of the negotiation. And that, of course, leaves us with the ultimate question. In this intense game of leverage and diplomacy, with both the US and Iran holding so firmly to their non-negotiable positions, which side is going to blink first?